Hello and welcome back to The Second Messiah, episode 21. In the previous episode we saw the final part of a battle against Macran forces where we destroyed their invading naval force at Adulis. We then had to make a decision between our two allies, Dacia and the Gepids, as they went to war. We broke the alliance with both and remained neutral. Macran came back with more forces at Berenike, invading with a large amount of cavalry who committed suicide against my spear lines just as the battle begun, which made the battle, which was going to be very difficult, become suddenly a lot easier, made even easier when we killed the enemy's king, setting fire to his ship, definitely killing him this time. The enemy's attack went on to fail. The Roman separatists who we're at war with in Western Africa were pretty much wiped out, both when Vithericus took their capital and when their surviving forces committed suicide, making really difficult attacks against our men, so we wiped them out entirely. Finally, we started chasing the Abasgians who have invaded our territory and have so far dodged Roderick's army. Let's continue. My friends, my children, the time of the Great Rebirth grows close. It is time to begin our final preparations for the completion of the Lord's plan. To the west, hostile Romans and the blinded African natives must be tamed. To the east, the greedy heathen kings of the old world must be kept off our sacred land. To the north, the spectre of the Huns hangs over the domain of the late Chief Saphrax, a domain where many of our people still reside. Let us divide our strength as follows to crush all our foes at once. Roderick will continue his noble efforts in securing the Nile. Egica shall scout west and look for a chance to take action against the Romans. Widimir, my son, shall sail north to bring an end to the rebellious Italian League, still waiting for their chance to hinder our plans. And Lord Geilamir shall sail to Italia, where I shall leave our old domain in his hands. With so many heroes commanding so many brave men, and with such a great and glorious God to steer us through all the dying world will throw against us, victory and salvation is inevitable. In the meantime, I shall tend to our mighty flock and build new shelters for those true believers who will flee into our embrace as the great schism of the earth begins. Continue in your efforts, my servants, and the Lord shall grant you all that you desire and more. Know that my word is that of our Creator, the only remaining source of truth. We're facing war on pretty much all fronts. Here you can see the Western Roman Empire to our west, with a little army that's raiding against the Maurians right now. Then there's the Abasgians who sneak around the Nile, going up north and then back south on the other side, evading Roderick, who is currently pursuing him. The Mazoon forces in the Mediterranean still just wandering around, getting closer and closer to our ports, potentially giving us a threat. And then there's Macran, who still have their own navies and armies hanging around in the far east of our territory. Not sure what they're up to, they're just sort of shifting around right now. We'll have to just keep an eye on them. They're not a huge threat though. So reaching the next turn, it's now up to Roderick to chase after the Abasgians. You can see that he can't actually reach them right now, meaning we can't force a battle, and the Abasgians are going to have a chance to move. They can either attack the town right next to them now, or rush backwards towards Alexandria. Their army looks decent, so whether we'd be able to hold either of those places is questionable. Now back in Europe, you can see the Huns are giving the Illyrians a hard time. They've got an army standing off against some Illyrian forces and another raiding in Verona, which of course is right next to our own territory. So it's starting to become a very possible reality that the Huns are going to come down into Italia and cause us issues. I've got these armies garrisoning Tarentum and Florentia, who I'm going to combine right at the top of our territory, so we have the most possible forces at the top. Neither particularly appropriate for fighting the Huns, but better than nothing, and it's what I have available right now. Egica is going to move west from Caesarea to go and challenge those Romans. If he gets a chance, we'll see if they stand and fight against him. Now moving on, the Huns seem to team up against the Illyrians, and the Illyrians are pushed back. It's not looking good for our ally there, and it is looking good for the Huns as a result. The Romans have an agent who appears from their army and starts harassing Egica there. I have a feeling this is going to be annoying because this agent is a super high level, so he's probably going to be doing all sorts of mischief against Egica and it's going to stop us from advancing, but we'll see what happens. First, we've got Abasgia to worry about. They indeed go right for the town next to them, bringing their full stack against the garrison. The garrison isn't all that small, it's actually pretty decent because I have military buildings in this town, but according to the balance bar, we're really in trouble. However though, we've seen defenses like this be pulled off before, admittedly with generals on our side, but we've still got a chance here, so we're going to fight this one out and see if at the very least we can damage the enemy enough so that when Roderick comes in the next turn, he can very easily overcome the remaining Abasgian forces. The enemy are focusing their attack on the north part of the town, where there are two uphill approaches into the settlement that we're going to be able to defend with our spearmen. Here, actually at both of them we've got towers overlooking our defensive positions, making life easier, and on this one we've got archers who can be able to fire over our spearmen to help out. So the enemy make their advance, sticking to these two approaches, luckily for me. Their forces are going to come right up and hit my defensive formation, taking fire from the tower the entire time. They do have hurlers who are throwing up at me, but at this point they're going to start killing their own men if they keep firing, so they'll probably stop. So I've got two squads of Comitatensis spears who are going to hold off this massive horde of enemies just rushing up the hill. We have the hill advantage, but the enemy has numerical advantage and probably man-to-man advantage. So a dangerous situation where I'm just going to hope we can hold out. On the other approach, the enemy first attacks with this tiny band. Unfortunately, the tower is inflicting friendly fire on my own men, as you can see, but the commander of my forces, the captain, cuts down an enemy, and the enemy fall back at this point, but they've got plenty more to come in. So here, a slower attack from the enemy. The support from my archers will make life easier than it is on the other approach. You can see a lot of these arrows are somehow just bouncing off thin air and coming back, but the ones that are managing to get towards the enemy hopefully will inflict some casualties. And we've got two squads of Legio Comitatensis guarding the capture point just in case they get through. I noticed that somehow a couple of those guys are making really massive dart throws, throwing straight up and dropping darts down into the enemy. Not particularly effective, but at least they're showing off. That's a very impressive range. Back over at the other approach, the first unit of Comitatensis spears has lost half of its men, and you can see the enemy really piling in now. In particular, the heavy cav coming in, which is good for me because the spears will have a chance to kill them. And of course, the tower right next to us is going to be able to knock people off their horses, which is particularly helpful. I think the enemy's general's in here as well, so I'm basically just waiting for the moment when the enemy's general is going to get killed somehow in this melee, which will give me a massive morale advantage, even though the enemy look like they're gradually overcoming my actual troops. Back on the other approach, my forces have almost routed. My archers aren't necessarily helping because they're just raining fire arrows into the enemy and hitting a decent number of my own men. I was really hoping they'd be killing more of the enemy, but actually it might have been about 50-50. At the very least, the enemy are getting drained down. The tower will be having its effect as well. And you can see in the background there, many of the units have already routed, and the balance bar is starting to shift towards a neutral position at this point. Only about half of these men remain, but of course when the enemy break through, we've got Legio to come in and fight with the rest of their forces, so it doesn't necessarily matter if we lose those spears right there. On the other approach, my one unit of cav has finally wheeled around the entire town and now makes a dangerous rear attack on the enemy. The enemy's troops have loads of spears, so attacking with these light cavalry is a bit dodgy, but the enemy's general dies at a very opportune moment just as I make my attack, which will really heighten the morale shock. Unfortunately, on the other approach, the enemy broke through. I replaced my archers on the barricade with Legio, who just stood there, mocking the enemy at first as they rushed in to start hitting the barricade. But the Legio can now throw their darts at point-blank range, hitting the enemy right in the top of the head with those deadly darts. I thought it would do more damage than it did, but it did something to the enemy at least. And plus, as you can see, the tower behind them is still attacking them. Very quickly, the enemy give up, and at this point, suddenly a chain rout ensues. All the forces on the other approach have been broken as well as a result of the rear attack and the loss of their general, and my cavalry are now going to be free to totally maraud among the enemy soldiers as they try to escape. A fantastic turn of events. The Comitatensis spearmen, the survivors of them anyway, will charge out to take revenge as well. So once again, a combined Gothic and Roman force has held off a superior enemy one trying to attack a settlement. A theme we're seeing quite a lot. It's a heroic victory, an important one. That means Roderick is free to move and the Abasgians are dead.
What a curious place the Nile has become. Some still remember what these people once were. The very way the world begged at their feet for mere scraps. But today, the great people of the Nile are heard of little. Instead, we hear of the Romans and the Goths flocking from across the world to not only enjoy the wealth the natives had worked so hard to create, but to fight and die for these lands as if they were their own, which I suppose they are now. Everyone here seems to believe in the Gothic prophecy and live contented by its promises. If Aethericus is wrong, however, well, I think the Nile will run red until no Roman or Goth remains.
Here are the results. Only tiny losses for the Goths compared to the Abasgian forces, including the loss of their general. I'm going to ransom off the prisoners in order to make some money, but immediately another stack appears to be coming down from the north, so it seems they intend to continue this invasion. The Mazoon forces are sneaking around there near Sicily. It seems they may intend to do something, but they're not using all their movement points, so they've obviously got something in mind. Next, the Macran forces take a long turn, meaning they're doing some sort of agent action against me, and it's Roderick who's the target of that. They're trying to reduce his movement points. At the same time, still moving about their tiny groups of units, even landing one and starting to move it in. It seems they might intend to do some raiding. It seems that someone has been preaching doom against Egica's army, the Sentinels of Arius. That'll be the Romans. But we have more inconvenient news, which is that Roderick has successfully had his movement points been taken away by the Macran agent. It's not going to be a huge deal right now because luckily for us, the defeated Abasgians are nearby, and the Macran forces that have landed aren't that powerful, so I don't expect they'll be able to make any kind of decisive move against me. So knowing this, I'm going to pursue the Abasgians. Luckily for me, when they escape from the battlefield, they just about remain within my remaining movement points, so the agent was not able to save his comrades here. We move in and use protective stance to wipe them out to minimize our losses. So their invasion has now been successfully defeated. Roderick has unfortunately been pulled away from Macran by doing this, so he'll now have to try and work his way back south to wipe out those surviving marauders of Macran. Now moving on, it was time for me to move Geilemir back to Attila. Aethericus doesn't really need Geilemir helping him out on his mission anymore, so he's going to head back and go back to our old lands effectively to try and help out with the war against the Huns. I've also got various forces who I've been moving up north just in case, as you can see here. I'm going to move these guys into reinforcement range of Verona, just in case the Huns attack it. That will allow me the option, at least, of coming in to fight the Huns in a settlement battle, which will be slightly easier perhaps than fighting them on the field with that sort of army. The Huns themselves are basically continuing to threaten Illyria. Illyria's already lost territory, and it looks like they recently lost this settlement here, Siscia, as well, and have rebuilt it, so I think they're probably on the back foot, although it's hard to tell because we can't see the full extent of the Huns' forces. They keep going in and out of the fog of war. Back in Africa, Aethericus is moving over from Caesarea to recolonize Constantinople. We're going to spend a massive amount of money and half of his troops, annoyingly, to rebuild this. The game tells us about a deceased enemy general at this point for some reason, but restarting this province is going to give us more territory in the area and allow us to build more buildings in the same province with Carthage and Hadrumetum, which will be useful for management. Now the Roman army near Egica I know just has a super high level spy inside it, which means more agent actions might be on the way inconveniently. Egica can't attack them right now. I thought it might be because of the Preached Doom, but actually his movement points are just limited because he has to cross a river to get into this territory. So I'll do the river crossing now. That uses basically all of his points, and now next time he's free to move on that side of the river. Another priority is stopping the Italians. They're nearby on Palma, and we're going to have to invade to stop them from counter-invading us at any moment. I build up a quick fleet here at Caesarea, and Widimir is going to take his army, the former army of Saphrax, to go and try and campaign against the island. The Huns backed the Illyrians around during the end turn sequence. It seems the Illyrians truly are starting to lose out. The Romans flee from the front near Egica, so he's not going to be able to strike out and kill them as I'd hoped, but he still needs to hang around because a war may start there. And the Abasgians also flee, so it seems they cancelled their invasion. The Mazone forces very cheekily land there in Sicily after all this time sailing around, so maybe they really do intend to actually fight one of my settlements. I'm really hoping the garrisons of all these settlements will be able to beat them if they attack, so I'm not going to raise a new army or move forces to stop them. Macran continue their meddlings. Their land force actually leaves, whereas more navies come in. I'm not sure what they're intending to do. And now I get a very disturbing message. Duty calls for the Sentinels of Arius. That's Egica's army, and that means Egica has been taken out of action. The message doesn't tell you why you have to replace him, so I'm left fearing the worst, that Egica has been killed in some way or perhaps died of natural causes. I used a little temporary replacement, and the message here says that someone has successfully assassinated him. This didn't sound good, but of course in Attila, a successful assassination doesn't actually mean they're dead, in a slight twisting of words. Another piece of bad news is that there's been a critical success in a deceive action against Roderick, meaning he now has no movement points at all, so he can't move south to try and deal with Macran's annoying raiding, which is very inconvenient, although it's not like it's a huge danger, so I'm willing to live with that. Now, I needed to confirm to myself that Egica was still alive from this supposedly successful assassination, but I can check that on the family tree, and he is indeed here. He's just wounded, so he'll be able to return to his army, but this has definitely delayed my campaign, which perhaps is what the Romans were planning all along. Happy? More like relieved to finally have my own damned campaign. Father seems to have finally gotten over the thrill of his appointment and is sorting our dynasty out. Guylemir believed, sure, but he has the charisma of a latrine. Me and Uncle Egica are true leaders. We're the ones people need to hear about. I thought I was going to be living in Chief Satrax's shadow my whole life, but this campaign is a chance to show that I can make an army do whatever needs to be done. I saw Uncle Egica at the palace recently. He got an arrow through his leg, but he won't say how. But anyway, I could see that he really understands what it means to be a warrior, and that Guylemir does not. With a small fleet now prepared at Caesarea, Widimir is going to be able to sail north towards the Italians at Palma, so he puts his army into the ships and we can get there right away in one turn. The question is whether to make a full-on naval assault or whether to land first, and landing first is generally going to be the safer option, so the ships ferry him over and will then just dump his army next to the town on land. That army is able to go right into the attack, as you can see. The balance bar is slightly in the enemy's favour. The enemy has a pretty large garrison, but it's not very varied. It's basically loads of spearmen inside, and they've got supporting garrison troops and ships outside who will come in as well, perhaps a match for my own ships. For now I can keep the encirclement going. I can bring in this fleet to blockade the port, which will reduce their siege holdout time. Since the balance bar isn't looking all that good, I decided to wait and see if they would sally out to attack me, because that would be more suitable for a victory. Looking at those Mazoon forces that landed in Sicily, what I wanted to do was just see what garrisons are available in the nearby settlements. And actually in both of them the garrison is pretty hefty. I don't think the enemy would be able to overcome it, especially because I believe the Mazoon forces have only partial strength in their regiments. I know they've been taking attrition for a while, and who knows where they came from initially. They might have actually faced battles. So I'm just going to ignore them right now. Guylemir is going to continue his voyage up to Neapolis, from which point he can disembark from the ships and move north towards Nova Uium, his eventual goal being to defend the northern end of Italia from potential Hun invasion. I've got forces up here already, but another thing that I was starting to worry about was all these Western Roman separatist forces. In previous episodes I kept calling the Roman separatists the Western Roman separatists. This is the real Western Roman separatists right here, right on my border, and they're very unfriendly towards me and they won't take a non-aggression pact. So there's a worry here that I'm going to get invaded by them at the same time as the Huns are marauding around, and we could get overwhelmed. Regarding the Huns, what I wanted to do was combine all of my local forces together, so I combined the two partial stacks I had into one stack and disbanded the scraps. I'll be recruiting some new forces, hopefully more suitable to fighting the Huns in this area. The Mazoon forces quit Sicily. It seems they realised they're not going to take one of my settlements, but they didn't really leave, they just went and sat at sea, so I'll have to find out what that means, and Macron are still moving about seemingly randomly. Now we get a very interesting piece of news. The Western Roman Empire have been defeated. I think it must have been their last army there in the Maurian territory that got taken down, so we're not going to have to chase them anymore. But some really bad news is that bubonic plague has taken hold in Caesarea, and this gives us some really massive negative penalties. Huge problem for this province. I guess it doesn't affect our campaign overall, and very luckily we had no forces there to catch the plague. I'm going to upgrade the sanitation there, and we'll see if it helps out at all. Egica is back from his period of being wounded, so he can now come back to resume his command of the Sentinels of Arius, giving them all their stat boosts back, so they're now ready to continue west. But the target is one we're neutral against, it's the Maurian Empire here. They've got a decent number of forces, but they don't have any defending Tingis, and Egica is within 1 turn's movement, so he can suddenly strike and take a settlement, meaning the war begins with a victory for us, taking a third of the enemy's territory away. So I'm going to open up diplomacy, I'm going to declare war. It's a bit dangerous to have just one army go out and face the enemy, considering the enemy have more than one army, but I decided that Egica would probably be itching for this campaign, and I wouldn't be worried about the fact the enemy will have numbers. He's going to go out on a limb like he has done before, take enemy territory, and if the enemy want to try and take it back, they'll have to go through him. So first, we hit Tingis with the army. There's really nothing inside we can protect if starts auto-resolve to take it. This splits the enemy's kingdom in two. They have territory in southern Iberia and territory to the south, but I think all of their forces are to the south, so they're going to be able to make a push back against us in the end turn sequence, and Egica's going to have to just sit in the town ready to resist it.
Attack!
Over on Palma, the Italians didn't attack during the last end turn sequence as I thought they might, so now the question is, should I just wait? It's going to be quite a long time before the enemy run out of supplies and start taking attrition, but I thought I might as well wait since there's no particular rush to get rid of those guys. Vidimir isn't particularly needed elsewhere right now, although we'll see if Egica succeeds, because if he doesn't, then he might be. Roderick is going to use what movement points he does have after the constant agent harassment to start moving south to deal with Macran. And now, as expected, the Maurians come back to try and retake Tingis. They move a fleet to blockade and then 2 armies at 1.5 stacks. The balance bar is somewhat in their favour, but it's actually not really far enough for me to be terribly worried. We've definitely won battles that are harder than this before. The downside here is that the enemy has lots of artillery ships and they're bringing in onagers, so they have a massive ranged advantage, which means if they don't make their attack too hastily, they could really batter us down. So it's going to be up to the AI to use their resources effectively here, but I'm pretty confident Egica's going to do okay. I wasn't even going to help out with the king's project, and here I am doing all the work. Typical. Luckily this work is going to be the most fun we've had in years. It's like these African dots don't even realise what we did to their rivals. Oh, I'm sure my 2,000 troops will be able to stop them, even though 20,000 already died thinking the same thing. Ridiculous. But then maybe again, they think that because they killed off the Roman court, they're somehow entitled to being feared. We need to take them down a peg. Order the men to give the enemy their finest mocking laughter when they show their faces. We'll have the heads of their comrades on pikes too. That should make my point. The battle begins right from the first second as I immediately have to order my ships out at sea to start darting around the place. I've got 2 ships, both of which have basically no crew on them. You can see there's just a couple of guys hanging around on the deck. They're not really going to be able to do anything, but the main point is I'm just moving them around as a distraction because they've deployed right near the enemy's ships, 2 of which are artillery ships. So of course my plan here is going to be to make the artillery ships fire at these crewless boats and basically just waste their shots. The boats can very luckily turn really rapidly, turn on a dime basically, meaning that when I see the enemy fire I can quickly give them new movement orders and make sure that the enemy always miss. Here I'm making them sail backwards to keep the distance from the enemy to maximise the amount of time I have to make a decision. Both the enemy ships are firing at this one boat. It's awkwardly reversing out the way and it twists just in time to dodge those shots. Very dodgy stuff here. But of course the enemy have actual ships as well. They've got slingers on one ship who are coming in close, and of course the slingers will just kill my crewmen. So I made a very desperate move. I ordered my melee ship to close in and engage the slingers because they won't fire whilst they're engaged in melee. Unfortunately, my men, while attempting to jump onto the enemy's ship, got completely annihilated in midair by the enemy's shots. So that plan didn't work at all. So it seems my little ship trick isn't going to last too much longer. Now the enemy's main forces are coming onto the field from the south, and now that they're on the field the balance bar has swung very far in their favour. It seems the campaign map misunderstood the balance of power in this battle. Suddenly the enemy have an advantage. I rushed 2 units of Legio to defend the approach they seem to be making. I had defended pretty much every other approach except this one, so I gambled incorrectly in my defensive formation, but I just about managed to set them into testudo formation before the enemy hit, and luckily for me the reinforcing general has led the way, giving me a chance to kill him, or let the tower kill him at least, in that close melee. Back out at sea, my archer ship is frantically running away from all the enemy's real ships, still having to dodge the artillery shots. It's doing really well in terms of draining the enemy's ammunition. We've already got half of the enemy's artillery ammunition down, so that's going to save a lot of lives on the land, which is great. One of the other ships landed its slingers behind my lines. I've got loads of reserves though in the centre of town, one of which is a cavalry unit, perfect for this situation. The cavalry can rush out from the middle of town and chase these slingers down, preventing them from getting any sneaky shots into the back of my legio or anything like that. They are going to be wiped out entirely, so we've just knocked that unit out before it could really fight. A very nice little move there. The enemy's general and cav fell back from fighting my legio, casualties on both sides, but my men retain their position and importantly still have the tower under their control. The general almost went back to his army, but at halfway he turned around and decided to come back for another go. The AI doesn't seem to really know what it's doing as usual. They rush in and are quite easily going to be able to flank this legio because the testudo has been turned whilst fighting, but it's not going to help them very much. I'm really hoping that the tower is going to kill enemies here, and in fact, as you can see there, the enemy's general is killed in this fight. Not their main general, only the general of the reinforcement army, so it doesn't cause the morale shock of the primary general dying, who I think is on one of the ships, but still, it's going to make a difference. So the enemy's forces are now going to start, slowly but surely, coming in to attack two approaches by the looks of it, focusing entirely on the south. And way behind them they have onagers slowly creeping up towards the battle. They're not going to wait for their onagers to get into position, so that's good for me. They're going to waste them at least for the start of the battle. So I'm going to try and hold the enemy off. I want to hold them on the edge of town to make sure my towers can maximize the number of kills they're getting. I've got Germanic noble swords guarding this approach. I've got another approach guarded behind it, but the enemy aren't going to attack it. And I've got some hidden falksmen round the corner if they break through to suddenly make a counter charge. So tons of enemy infantry are now piling in against my infantry. The testudo is easily surrounded, unfortunately. It's going to have to fight on all of its flanks, and it is going to take pretty high casualties, but the whole time it's delaying the enemy. The tower is going to be killing enemies, and the legio themselves will kill a few enemies. Their attack values aren't very high, so it's not going to do all that much. It's a similar case here with the noble swords. The noble swords aren't very good at killing enemies, but they survive for a long time in melee. So the enemy are going to exhaust themselves fighting here. They will win eventually because of their numerical superiority. They can just keep pushing new troops into this fight. My men are going to be really under pressure, but we're going to hold the enemy off for a really long time. More enemy naval crew are now landing behind my lines. Again, two squads of slingers, more perfect targets for my cavalry to just rush out and attack. So I was pretty glad that they were trying to make this sneaky rear attack on me because they didn't seem to think I'd have reserves. And now the two enemy's artillery ships, who have finally finished off my boat by the way, are now going to start firing on land targets. What I did was basically sacrifice the unit of Commodore Tensis spears. I loosened them up and rushed them to be near the artillery ships to just stand there and take all of the remaining ammunition. Since they're loose and because the enemy are firing at their maximum range, it's not going to be too devastating, although you'll see what happens next time when the enemy's real onagers come into play. See the main part of that battle and keep our eyes to the north as Attila takes to the field in the next episode of The Second Messiah.